Okay, so out of the entire Alien franchise, Prometheus arguably has the most going on in it, laced with several high-level concepts such as where we come from, our purpose in the universe, and the chaotic nature of life. It has a lot going on beneath the surface. Throughout the film, we follow the crew of the Prometheus, though the most interesting of them isn't exactly human. Michael Fassbender plays a synthetic android David who accompanies them on the mission. David is much like the figure of Prometheus from myths that has been instructed to act a certain way. Created solely to serve, the corporation has complete control of him. This can even be seen down to the character's fingerprints, which bear the Weyland logo. Just in the same way Prometheus took fire from the gods and rebelled against his masters, David uses the black goo to stand against his. Now, in case you don't know, the myths have Prometheus making humanity from clay and mud. However, he gave the humans fire, which was forbidden. This was something that was supposed to be exclusive to the gods, and they worried humanity would use it against them. Thus, Prometheus was punished. There's a feeling with the synthetics that they could take us down as well, and fear of AI is something that's rampant in real life. This mind state's also reflected in the humans as well. The movie acts as a cautionary tale of what happens if you do something forbidden by the gods. This even leads to Holloway being burned with a flamethrower, with fire of course being tied to the myth. However, there's also deeper ties to other stories and religions. The film even takes place at Christmas, with a captain setting up a tree.
What the hell is that?
It's Christmas. Why don't you leave it till the morning?
Oh, no. It's Christmas, Captain. And I want to open my presents.
Beyond that, Shaw also gives birth on Christmas Day. When discussing the films with Movies.com, Ridley Scott answered one of the big questions around the film. That is, why did the engineers want to destroy Earth? After all, the movie says they created us, but they seem pretty mad when we go out to meet them. Now, if you cast your mind back, you might remember there were rumors about a Jesus engineer. The story was that Jesus was actually a child who was taken from Earth to an engineer planet. He then learned of their values and was sent back to Earth. Ridley said that engineers looked at it like we were kids misbehaving and that we could be seen as out of control. There was constant war and pain, and Jesus was the last chance to save us. We then crucified him, and Scott confirmed the engineers were going to wipe us out for it. Shaw says the engineers they find died 2,000 years ago, and this was right before they were going to journey to our planet.
How long's it been dead?
2,000 years, give or take.
Now on the Blu-ray, we have a deleted scene that has more dialogue with the engineer. This explains his motivations for smashing Weyland's head with David like the like button. Weyland explains why he wants to live forever, and he uses David to showcase how he's a god. Thus he believes he should be perceived as one and receive immortality in exchange.
You and I, we are superior. We are gods, and gods never die.
However, the engineers were supposed to see humans as now reaching the point in which we were extremely dangerous. Like the gods, worried about humans using fire against them, the engineers worry that humans could attack them. So it even plays off our fear of AI. This is why the engineer attacks David first though, and he destroys the creator with the creation. In turn, David takes revenge on them in Alien Covenant and destroys the creators of his creator. Though Ridley Scott said the thing with Jesus was a bit too on the nose, I think you can still see the echoes of it in the script. There's actually a lot of changes from the screenplay that definitely need explaining, and we'll be going through it all in this video. First though, just a quick word from our sponsors. Now I just want to give a huge shout out to our sponsors, Star Trek Fleet Command. This is the strategy game that lets you boldly go where no player's gone before. Featuring the iconic ships, the game allows you to recruit the legendary characters and embark on missions across the Star Trek universe. It really is the most authentic Star Trek experience, and you can play it all from your PC or mobile. Right now we've got a QR code on screen and a link in the description that will let you go and play the game for free. What I love about it is that it's like your own personal journey through the incredibly rich history of Star Trek. The first 5 levels involve first contact with the galaxy, and under the guidance of cadet officers like Kirk, Spock and Uhura, players begin to learn the core skills needed for command. It lets you tackle your first skirmishes and establish a starbase. That then takes you to the Star Trek Voyager Year of Hell Part 1. 2025 marks the 30th year of the iconic series release, and it follows on from the events of it. 7 of 9 was never able to fully integrate into civilian life on Earth, and we follow the aftermath and new adventures with her. Right now, Star Trek Fleet Command is rolling out the red carpet for you with a ton of welcome gifts. This includes the epic Romulan Captain Nero, who increases the damage of weapons by 40%. It's an epic promotion for all new players, and you get this and a whole host of extra rewards if you complete a 7-day login streak. Also, if you buy any bundle greater than $4.99 in game, then you'll unlock Lieutenant Picard for free. Created specifically for new users, enlisting Picard gives you an extra bonus against enemies early on in the game. But there's even more! Players can redeem the promo code Crushers to get 2 full officer unlocks and a full unlock of the jellyfish once you hit Ops 18 for free. The ship gift will become visible at level 11 for anyone who claims it. The promo runs from now until the end of January, and the associated jellyfish bundle is live until 7 days after. In the bundle, you'll get Beverly Crusher and Wesley Crusher at full unlocks, the jellyfish at a full unlock too, and that's all once the player hits Ops 18 via hidden token visuals. All you have to do to play the game for free and get these incredible rewards is scan my QR code or click the link in the description. Just click my link in the description or scan the QR code on screen to go and download it now. The galaxy needs a leader. Will you answer the call? Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and in this video we're breaking down Prometheus. The Alien prequel was engineered by Ridley Scott to fill in the questions audiences had about the Space Jockey, arguably the most mysterious aspect of the original film. For better or worse, Ridley decided to fill in the blanks, or some of them. The film definitely poses a lot of questions too, and there's a lot of things to talk about. What we end up with contemplates the mysteries of the universe, and whether it's better or not to have your questions answered. Because of that, I feel the film is very meta. Now, to be honest, I think Prometheus is one of those prequels that had an impossible task. I don't think they could have ever done justice to the Space Jockey mystery, as we'd of course had decades of our own imaginations. Everyone had come up with a theory or was satisfied with simply not knowing. It's kind of like the ship at the start of The Thing, in that it's actually better to not know what's going on. To me anyway. Over the years though, people had tried their hands at filling in the blanks. Even the Dark Horse comics, which I'll get out, they had a segment with them being elephant-like bounty hunters, which is a far cry from what we get here. Now though we didn't get the film until 2012, it actually started development a full decade earlier. Fox were desperate to revitalize the Alien franchise after there'd been mixed feelings on some of the sequels. Though Aliens is still regarded as one of the best films ever made, 3 and Resurrection, you know, they had their issues. Around this time though, James Cameron had begun working on a sequel with him being part of a writing team. During this though, Fox went to him with the idea they'd cross over 2 of their big franchises. That was of course Alien vs Predator. First teased in Predator 2, they decided to pit the Xenomorphs against them. However, Cameron didn't really like the idea and he felt it would kill the series. So he dropped out in 2006 as he felt like things were over. The fact they'd gone to him and still went against his wishes, it made him feel like they'd try and override his decisions. So instead, he worked towards Avatar, which, you know, due to it being an original IP, meant he could basically do what he wanted. As we know, that went on to be the biggest movie of all time, so he probably made the right decision. Now, though AVP did well enough to garner a sequel, it wasn't the big blockbuster Fox expected. Reviews were bad as well, and rumblings were that Weaver had read the script and refused to sign on to it. So it didn't exactly have much prestige attached to it, and Fox wanted to restore that to the franchise. Now, throughout these breakdowns, I reference in Outplaying podcasts a lot because they have a lot of industry insights. Stuart from them used to work at Fox, and he went through the thinking at the time. You see, kids, it was fashionable at the time to reboot characters with a back-to-basics movie. Batman Begins and Casino Royale had both ended up being highly regarded. Batman and Robin, Die Another Day, you know, they weren't exactly well received, but those aforementioned films had revitalized their characters. Stewart said Fox wanted basically Alien Begins, and thus they returned back to Scott. However, as we see in the final product, he wasn't too interested in doing that. Scott thought the Xenomorphs were two-dimensional and wanted to tackle high-level concepts. Scott was far more interested in the Space Jockey, but the issue was, Fox weren't interested in that. If you cast your mind back to our Alien breakdown, you might remember he had to fight to keep it in the movie. Fox had wanted the Space Jockey completely cut, but Scott stood his ground and thus they let him do it. I think the back and forth of this massively affected these prequels, as we have these two sides constantly pulling in opposite directions. Scott wanted to tackle creationism, and Fox just wanted a Xenomorph horror. That's even seen from the trailer, which is clearly based around the original one for Alien. When we get to Alien Covenant, it's a massive course correction, and it's something the creators said was impacted by In their words, feedback. In interviews, Scott even said he didn't want to show any xenomorphs at all due to the creature being squeezed dry in the sequels. He's quoted as saying there's no way he'd go back there, but fan complaints made him change his mind for Covenant. Before Prometheus though, Scott had Fox at his mercy. Stewart said they could either do it with him or take the chance on a brand new director. That hadn't worked out with AVP, and as things rolled ahead in 2009 when Fox announced the film. John Spaeth worked on a script which was eventually redeveloped by Damon Lindelof. The movie went through numerous title changes, including Alien Engineers, Alien Genesis, and Alien Origins. There was a time where it was also titled Paradise, which would play off the poem Paradise Lost. However, Scott had a change of heart after he felt it gave too much away. He would later plan to call the sequel Paradise Lost as well, before then changing it to Covenant. So it's work that has a lot of influences. I'm not going to read the poem Paradise Lost out because it's like 10,000 lines long, but there are a lot of similarities. It begins with Satan and his angels being banished to hell after God stops their rebellion. It also tackles Adam and Eve, who live in a time of innocence. They then become aware of sin and cast out from the Garden of Eden. So we have these two sides that both disobey God and lose their paradise because of it. It tackles themes like free will, the complexities of good and evil, and also whether one can be justified in disobedience. It's all things you can apply to the film, with Shaw and Holloway representing Adam and Eve, or so it seems at least. The poem actually ends on a rather hopeful note as the pair are banished from the garden. Though there's the feeling of despair, they know that salvation will arrive with Jesus. The film ends with Shaw and David heading out to the engineer planet, with Shaw still hoping she's gonna get answers. Even after all she's seen, she's still affirmed in her faith and hopeful about what's gonna come. She still has questions about who made them and thus keeps wearing her cross. So you can't even see Shaw and David as being Adam and Eve, with this being a new bond between man and machine, or woman and machine. Obviously that's my interpretation, and if you have your own then please drop it below, because there's not many answers in this film. However, there are a lot of ties to Paradise Lost beyond that. You of course have a serpent that attacks the characters, with this possibly being linked to the Garden of Eden. David is also a figure who tempts several characters. You could also argue he's a play off Lucifer as he rebels against his creators. However, what we do know is that the initial script was way more tied to Alien. Spaeth had connected all the dots and even set things on LV-426. The ship crashing, the Xenomorph at the end, it all set up the events of that film. However, Scott had a change of heart. Though he announced in 2010 the script was complete, he instead went to Lindelof and asked for a rewrite. It was said that if it was too closely tied, there's nothing interesting to discuss as we know how things are going to end. Lindelof even stated that if the ending of Prometheus is just John Hurt walking into a room full of eggs, then there's nothing interesting in that. Which, I don't know mate, I quite like when prequels do that. Rogue One, the 2011 Thing movie, I think they just end in ways that make me want to jump into the originals. I feel like Scott might have changed his mind eventually though, as he of course did Alien Romulus, which is kind of an interquel packed with references. However, it's clear they didn't want to do that at the time, and Lindelof removed most of the Alien references. Now if you go into this film looking for answers to all this stuff there, I think you're going to be greatly disappointed. Lindelof is of course known for Lost, and I think the guy's style, it tends to revolve around asking questions that let the audiences speculate, rather than, let's say, delivering satisfying answers. That's the case with his Watchmen as well, which I actually quite like the ambiguity of. However, he actually said he tried to steer it more towards Blade Runner and took more of a focus on David. Fassbender even admitted to studying the film, with him looking at Rutger Hauer's Roy Batty. David changes his hair early on, and this is a similar colour to Roy's. Rachel also changes her after looking at a photo on Deckard's piano, which David was also referencing. Beyond that though, early drafts of the script had the corporation as Wayland Tyrell. In the film, this is cut down to just Wayland before it became Wayland-Yutani. However, it is believed that we may have seen this takeover. Though Charlize Theron is in the film, getting her to the role of Vickers was an interesting journey.
Why?
Now initially, Theron was wanted for Shaw. However, due to Mad Max Fury Road, she was unable to commit. If you've checked out our breakdown on that film, which why haven't you, you'll know that movie was plagued with delays. Unable to film, her schedule opened up, and thus she was able to take on the smaller role of Vickers. Along with Lindelof and Scott, the three developed brand new scenes for the movie. Now unfortunately, what this cost was Michelle Yeoh's character from the film. Though we don't know exactly what role she'd have been playing, it is believed by some that she would have been a Yutani. Instead of the daughter and father struggle that we got in the film, it is theorized it would have been one for corporate control. Yutani would attempt to seize it in his death and then override him as the majority shareholder. The novel Alien Covenant Origins was released before the sequel, and that did help to fill in some of the blanks. That explained Utani bought up the company after Weyland and Vickers' death, but the name was kept for marketing reasons. So her being Utani, it's all speculation, and there are some that said she simply would have been Vickers. Either way, the family provides an interesting dynamic. Weyland describes David as,
He is the closest thing to a son I will ever have.
and this clearly rubs Vickers the wrong way. She doesn't even take on her father's name, and seems unmoved by his death. I feel like this highlights she always felt second best and that her father loved the robot more. If you look at them side by side, you can even see how David shares her characteristics. Both are blonde hair and blue eyed and clearly meant to resemble siblings. It's even possible that Vickers feels like people may suspect she's an android due to the fact that David's regarded so highly. When she ends up sleeping with Yannick, this is initiated by him saying this line.
Hey, Vickers. I was wondering, are you a robot?
So I think she sleeps with him purely just to prove a point, and it's to stand up to how she's been disregarded her whole life. There isn't really any love between the pair, with Pierce coming in towards the third act. Now, one of the big criticisms about the film at the time was that they cast a middle-aged actor in old-age makeup. The thought was that they didn't need to do it and should have just cast an old guy instead. In a further reference to Blade Runner, Rukawa was also in talks with them, and they also tied with Max von Sydow. However, there was going to be a scene in Hypersleep where David was going to interface with him. We see this in the case of Elizabeth Shaw and get some insight into her dreams. With Weyland, we'd see him as a young man and learn of his obsession with eternal life. According to IMDb trivia, the scene would have Weyland on a yacht surrounded by a group of beautiful women. So you can see why they needed a young actor to do that. Nowadays, they'd probably just de-age them.
Kill it! Kill it with fire! Everyone flee!
But back then, the technology was still emerging. However, Scott felt Weyland's arrival at the end would be more of a surprise, so they removed the character's early scenes. However, Pierce had been cast. Realising it was a bit weird to have him cast like this, they filmed a TED conference which can be found on the Blu-ray. This was also used to introduce David, and it was released online in the build-up to the film. In this conference, he tells the story of Prometheus and foreshadows a lot of the film. He also foreshadows his death and says this.
We are the gods now. I haven't been struck down. I'll take that to mean I'm right.
He of course called himself a god in the deleted scene and was then struck down for it. Now Pierce was later brought back for Covenant, which retroactively fixed this criticism. In the Peter Weyland files, we also get a further reference to Blade Runner. There was a document that described his mentor as a man who was like a god on top of a pyramid. This was another clear nod to Tyrell, with him saying his replicants were abominations. Saying the false memory implants literally blew up in his face, this was of course a reference to the character's death. Weyland's ambitions of course blow up in his face too, and there's definitely a sense of irony from the scene. The Weyland logo is also made up of triangles to form a W, but you could see these as being pyramids. Where we begin though is potentially billions of years ago, which is when we see a ship over a waterfall. They did consider making this a horseshoe, however they felt that due to the time between this and Alien that the engineer's tech would have evolved and developed. According to IMDb trivia, Scott also considered a pyramid which would have linked with the Space Jockey ship original design. I did wonder if it was a rebellious faction of the engineers, and just like how we have people with different goals and allegiances, that the engineers did as well. Prometheus was obviously a rebel, and that kind of fits what I thought was going on in the scene. It's at this point that we then see an engineer on the planet. I did wonder if this figure was Prometheus and that he'd stolen the black goo. The punishment for the figure was to have his guts ripped out every day, which would then grow back at the end. This punishment would go on forever, with it all being linked to his stomach.
My tummy hurt.
You might notice the first thing the engineer does after drinking it is bend forward with a pain in his abdomen, so it's possible that that's what's going on. However, it's also been clarified that the goo manifests one's ambitions and darkest desires. The engineer wanted to, well, engineer life, and thus this is why life came forth. As we learn, Shaw also can't have children, and thus she views herself as being unable to create life. So she's fascinated with this stuff, but in the end, she gives birth to something horrific. So it's kind of be careful what you wish for thing, where she gets what she wanted, but it becomes a twisted version. I do kind of think the black goo needs more consistency though, which is an issue I've always had with it. It's basically just does whatever the writer needs it to at the time, and isn't really set up with tangible rules, which you could see as showcasing the chaos that is life. But in the movie, I do think you need rules for stuff to really make sense, and I don't know if it works. For me, anyway. The effects in it look brilliant though, with the visual team studying the degradation of silicone when oil and ink was pulled into it. This was then shown a time lapse so they could reference how to dismantle the figure. Now, it has also been said by Scott that this scene isn't necessarily even Earth. I do like the way that some of the God's eye view shots appear like veins, and the colours of it tie nicely to what happens with the engineer. Now, this scene was actually shot in Iceland, with the Helka Valley also being used for LV-223, so potentially this could even be that planet. Though I've always taken this as the engineer creating us, Scott has played coy with the intentions. I think Scott just doesn't want to out and out deny religions and get too tangled up in the mythology. Instead, all he intended was showing us that the engineers can engineer life. Whether that's us or people who subscribe to the channel, it's not something he clearly wishes to clarify. From my interpretation though, we see cells going into the sea. This then starts off the theory of evolution in which our ancestors crawled forth and came onto the land. The area appears to be like Scotland as well, which is where we travel to next. Now, what Scott is willing to clarify is that he believes that humans may have had a helping hand. According to the wiki, he said, NASA and the Vatican agree that it is almost mathematically impossible that we can be where we are today without there being a little help along the way. That's what we're looking at in the film. Inspired by chariots of the gods, along with Jesus, we have other figures guiding us. This is why the engineers are on the cave walls and why the constellation constantly repeats. It's sort of them building their own religion, and we know from the behind the scenes shots that the engineer was originally accompanied by others. These figures can be seen in religious-like dress, and thus this was way more of a ritual rather than a rogue figure. Now, Shaw interprets these markings as being an invite so humans can go out and meet their creators.
An invitation.
However, it has been theorized that this is actually a warning. The planet is filled with black goo and it could have been warning us to stay away. It's thought that, much in the same way the signal from Alien wasn't an SOS, that we misinterpreted the cave painting's meaning. They looked at lots of different things when developing the engineers and even designed them to resemble statues of ancient Grecian and Roman gods. So we've got lots of things from the history of Earth all pulling together with these creatures. The title then appears with the letters assembling in a similar way to how they did in the original Alien. Taking us to a cave on the Isle of Skye, we see the year's 2089. After the journey through space, we go to 2093 and the film takes place roughly 30 years before Alien. Now, because of this, people have obviously wondered why the technology looks so much better here. Ridley cleared this up when promoting Romulus and said there's two types of tech that the humans have. The first is the Atari type tech we see the workers have, and then the Apple tech that the elite do. Wayland's one of the richest men on Earth, and therefore his ship's based on the latter. Another big point of contention I've seen is that people think it's way too soon to master interstellar travel. However, I think if you time travel to someone in 1900, I doubt they'd think we'd travel to the moon just 69 years later. Allegedly, and I'm holding back my 69 joke there. Now, in the first cave painting, we see some animals including a horse in motion. This was based on real paintings from the Chauveau cave with the layout looking identical. A Horse in Motion was also the first motion picture ever made, and thus I feel like Ridley's using this to showcase how often this signifies the next step. Now, there were going to be other versions of this discovery, including caves like this around the universe. We'd learned that Weyland had terraformed Mars and that a dig site like this was happening on the planet. A little nod to this can be found in the hologram message, with this being recorded on Mars. If you look in the back, you'll see structures like this being built, with these being made to house life on the planet. I did wonder if they'd tie that into the face on Mars, and there's definitely a similarity between that and the engineer design. Either way, they see the configuration, and that then takes us to the Prometheus. I love the way it glides in, with it seeming almost like a sun rising over a planet, and then the reveal that it's actually the ship. Though it says the destination's undisclosed, we later learn it's LV-223. This is the Zeta Reticuli system, which was later referenced in the opening of Alien Romulus. That's because it's the location of LV-426, which is where the first two films took place. This is a real-life system as well, and it's located about 40 light years away. Though it's unknown whether it can support life, it is thought to be similar to ours. It's believed that LV-223 is also a reference to Leviticus 22:3. That passage says, "Say to them, if any man among all your descendants throughout your generations approaches the holy gifts which the sons of Israel dedicate to the Lord, while he has uncleanness, that person shall be cut off from before me. I am the Lord." This obviously ties into the film and even the idea of Prometheus and fire. On board, we then meet David 8. Ridley put this in place because he wanted it to subtly hint he was an android, which was an idea he had for Ash. However, that was removed due to the twist, whereas here it's out in the open. According to IMDb trivia, Cameron also toyed with the idea that Bishop would be walking around while everyone was asleep. However, he felt the knife trick scene was a way better way to do it, and yeah, I probably agree. Now the 8 was put as a reference to Ripley 8 in Alien Resurrection, which we've done a big breakdown of on the channel, if you want to check it out. That gets a further nod in the basketball scene where we see him getting nothing but net, just like Ripley. And he's on a bicycle, alright mate, no need to show off.
Ooh, world star! World star!
Either way, we also see him looking into Shaw's dreams and we meet her father. Patrick Wilson shot this in one day, with the scene actually being filmed in London. They constructed a little African village and had him quickly shoot the scene. We later learn her dad died of Ebola, which was something that reflects Holloway's death. Now, there were rumours that because of this, he had to be quarantined, and that it also plays into how Holloway's killed. Vickers has to burn him alive, as he could come on board and affect the ship. So it's subtly setting these things up, but they don't address it in the movie. Either way, I love the dreamlike effect of things popping up as she mentions them, and also how we end with David stood watching her. Learning ancient languages that will help him later on, he also watches Lawrence of Arabia.
Certainly it hurts.
Well, what's the trick then?
The trick, William Potter, is not minding that it hurts.
Now this line plays heavily into the film, as we see David styles himself on Lawrence, and he also adopts this mentality as well. David's gonna do some horrible things later, but the trick for him is not minding that he's doing it. Beyond that, the scene was also described in full during the TED conference by Wayland.
When asked by his colleague William Potter to reveal his trick, Lawrence just smiled and said, "The trick, Potter, is not minding it hurts."
Wayland then goes on to discuss the similarities of the fire on the match and the fire of Prometheus. So I feel like this fire represents the black goo, and David isn't minding what he's going to use it for. Fassbender, of course, modelled his performance on Peter O'Toole, and in the film Lawrence uses a machine gun called Vickers. Now obviously, he's completely cool, calm and collected. This is in juxtaposition to his quote-unquote sister Vickers, who we meet next. Forcing herself through push-ups, she climbed out of the stasis tube and went straight to exercise. As we've seen throughout the franchise, people slowly wake up, with them describing it as being like a hangover. This is exemplified in Shaw and the others, who all wake up looking like they've been on a night out with Ryan Airy in Edinburgh. Pff, kill me. This shows Vickers' strong mind state though, and how she wants to try and push beyond everyone. I think she's just doing it to prove to herself though, as she's obviously grown up with this perfect being as a brother, and she's being constantly compared to him. Now originally, Theron shot this scene completely nude, with this being something that was shown at Comic-Con. It got a lot of attention, obviously, and Scott even said it was in the movie. However, it was switched out for this, which might have been to try and lower the age rating. Though that's never been confirmed, he did say it was supposed to be a flip on the end of Alien. Originally the plan there was to have Ripley completely naked and the Xenomorph would get sexually excited. As we know, that never made it to the final cut, but Ridley wanted to have this scene juxtapose that. This would then play off at the end of the film, in which the original script had Vickers at the lifeboat. She'd then strip off to go down for stasis before being attacked by a trilobite. Now it's stuff like this that I think adds towards debunking the theory she's a machine herself. We also have David, who lists off how far they've travelled and so on. However, Vickers says,
Any casualties?
Which to me is a more human response. He's just interested in the statistics and data, whereas she's wondering if anybody's died. Beyond the crew, this could also be her inquiring about her father, and though it's a bit of a cold way to ask, she clearly still has some part that cares for him. Next they have breakfast and sit around a table, which is a staple of the first two films. We see the characters meeting and get different archetypes, and yeah, it's something the franchise has always been good at. It's kind of crazy how many of these went on to become big actors, and it's like a who's who sort of scene. Is that Benedict Wong? Is that creepy fish guy from Mission Impossible? One thing I've always found a bit weird though, is that they ask them if they want to back out from the mission. It's like, you just traveled 2 years mate, and I'm in the middle of space. Where am I gonna go? I have seen this compared to the briefing scene in Aliens though, and they were also informed of the mission late in the game. There though, they're military, so they're used to going on jobs like that, whereas here, it seems like they're all mercenaries. Wayland then rattles off about how David will never age, and it's clear he's envious of him. However, Wayland says that the one thing he doesn't have is a soul, and this clearly sits bad with the android. I think Ridley's always done brilliant studies on what it actually means to be alive, and this is of course seen in Blade Runner. I always felt Raised by Wolves was like a spiritual sequel to this as well, and it's a theme he tackles over and over. Wayland also says that he's long dead, and the way Vickers looks at the floor kinda gives away she knows this isn't true. According to IMDb trivia, this moment was also based off Foundation, which is, well, a foundation of sci-fi. In this, the figure of Harry Seldon appears in holograms, and this is to leave messages to those in the future, all while hiding the mission's true purpose. Definitely recommend giving that a watch on Apple TV if you haven't, and also pick up the book because it's absolutely fantastic. It's a foundation of sci-fi. Joke, but yeah, talking once more about Prometheus, he leaves by introducing Shaw and Holloway. The constellation clearly resembles Orion's belt, which too is something that fascinated multiple cultures. In ancient Greece, it was named after the hunter from myths, whereas the Egyptians believed it was the resting place of Osiris. The Chinese thought it was Pinyin Shen, who was basically their figure Orion. The ancient city of Teotihuacan, which I've definitely butchered, that also had two pyramids built that pointed towards it. The three stars from it even appear in this scene, with them being situated above Shaw's head. David is clearly fascinated by the pair, and he then shows them around Vickers' lifeboat. Got a whole Ice Queen thing going on here. We're told that these are her personal quarters, but we get a further clue that Wayland's alive due to the medbay. This is specified for men only, like a Yorkie, and thus there's no need for Vickers to have it. She also divulges what she thinks of the mission. She's sure that the cave scribblings were just left by savages, and clearly thinks this is a big waste of time. So her being there, it kinda shows there's another reason for her to go on this journey.
Miss Vickers, is there an agenda that you're not telling us about?
Shut up, mate, yeah? Just drink your martini. Shaken, not stirred. They've also been told they can't make contact, and she clearly views them with contempt. This is shared in Holloway's view of David, and he mocks him in his lessons. Entering the planet's atmosphere, we then get a scene that was deliberately made to mirror the one from Alien. There's lots of shots of the screen, and the crew jiggling about in their seats, and we get a focus on the landscape. As they approach the landing area, you might also notice the giant lines on the surface. These were based off the Nazca lines in Peru, which have fascinated people for centuries. It was long thought these couldn't have been created without an aerial view, which wouldn't have been something people could have got at the time. Thus, it has been theorized they were made by ships capable of hovering. This all came to prominence in Chariots of the Gods, with it being thought they might be a landing site for alien spacecraft. There's even a figure that's said to be an astronaut, and I like how Ridley brought this to the film. In terms of creating the effects, VFX artist Stephen Messing used NASA aerial photography of Iceland. These were then digitally altered with 3D set extensions filling out the land. As they come in, you might also notice the dome structures with the other parts popping out the top. Later on we get a better look at it and can make out a faded skull at the top. For the finalized design of this, they also looked at the newborn from Alien Resurrection, which you can definitely see a likeness to. Now if you know anything about the adaptations of Dune, then these might also look familiar. Before David Lynch got signed onto the project, Ridley Scott was actually in the running. Alongside H.R. Giger, they worked on the film and created several character and set designs. For example, the Harkonnen armor that eventually got repurposed into the Xenomorph's body. Beyond that though, they also created the Baron's home to be a sphere shape with a face on top of it. This was then brought over to this film as they felt like the design should still look Giger-esque. Now Giger wasn't initially tapped to work on the film, and initially they just went off his designs. They looked back at the ones for the original film and tried to spin ideas off from that. They of course had to get his permission though, but they cut out the middleman and he just got invited over. Through this, he created several new designs, and you can definitely see his style. Suiting up, Holloway asks why David wears one if he doesn't need oxygen. It's all done to comfort the humans and make us feel more at ease. David explains that humans feel better interacting with someone that's like them, and yeah, when you think about it, yeah, there's no real need to make humanoid robots. Just make one that has loads of arms and can do loads of jobs at once and pick loads of stuff up, yeah? General Grievous, perfect design. It's all done for us, and David also starts to show his dissent here.
Making you guys pretty close, huh?
Not too close, I hope.
I think deep down he knows he's superior, and yet he's forced to serve. He'll outlive us, outperform us, and is better in every way, and yet people like Holloway still look down on him. So lad just thinks, I could make these YouTube videos, what am I watching this idiot for? I feel like David should just decide to drop the suit and go out in a t-shirt or something, and the guy would actually have some pretty great options there. Take for instance, our Alien Chestburster shirt available at the merch store below. If you're a big fan of the franchise, it's been made for you and you're gonna look bloody fantastic in it. Just like David. Just check that out and some of the other shirts below, and huge thank you to everyone who's picked one up. You look great. Heading out, Holloway does a sarcastic one small step joke, and it kinda shows he's not taking it serious. Upon stepping out, we get another reference to aliens as we can see things from Holloway's perspective. This creates a feed with a heartbeat monitor akin to what the Marines had when entering the hive. Huge shout out to ZX on Reddit for pointing out that when all their feeds are on the monitor, we can see David has no heart rate due to being synthetic, which is a nice little detail, I appreciate that. Discovering a doorway, this then takes them inside the structure. It's clearly riffing off the trio entering the ship in Alien, where there being long cavernous corridors. An addition I love here though is the mapping technology, which creates such a good effect. Lining the pyramid, it builds a 3D model of the environment. As the crew go in, we also see as the caverns become like the resin walls in the original films. Even the shape of the corridor is bone-like, and it leads them to a mysterious room. Taking a chance on the atmosphere being breathable, Holloway removes his helmet. Scientists these guys are. This again shows that we sort of came from the engineers, as we can live in the same atmosphere as them. As they travel in further, we also get a recording of engineers running to a lab. Clearly, there was a black goo outbreak, and it highlights the dangers of playing God. Fifield and Milburn decide to head out, but ultimately they get lost. Coming across a gigantic head, we see a play on the egg room from Alien. Here though, they're canisters of black goo, and we see as worms are also living in the soil. This explains how the hammerpedes created, as these end up mixing with the goo. Looking back around, they see a mural, with the first image of this being akin to the cave paintings. However, as they get deeper in, we get what appears to be an alien queen. When Aliens came out, Scott said he didn't really like the queen, and his idea of the eggs was to be more like a metamorphosis. Because of that, it has been theorized that this is something else, that is known as the deacon, which gets its name due to its head. That's because it's supposed to resemble a deacon's headdress from a Catholic church. The deacon would have been made in the lab in this temple, but technically it's just a relative to the Xenomorphs. Now Scott has confirmed that David is in fact responsible for creating the Xenomorph type that we met in the original film. Beyond this, I also did some digging into what Lindelof intended. He did his usual, which is that he said he wrote this script with just this movie in mind, and that if there was a sequel, then whoever wanted to write that, you can answer it how you want. Thank you, writer of Lost. However, he said he thinks the Xenomorphs we meet in the original films, they should be renamed human Xenomorphs because they're made from our DNA.
DNA. Match.
So though this is a form of the Xenomorph, it's not strictly one of them. To me though, it's just something that I feel is probably part of the original script. I can see how this would simply be the original Xenomorph that all the others sprung out from. However, rather than making the planet stuff like LV-426, we need to have a ship crash on a different planet. So rather than having a queen, we need to have some backwards, long-winded explanation instead of a simple one.
Watch me. I'll do the fingering.
I think this film does that a lot, and they really over-convoluted it when it would have been so easy to just keep things simple. Like it's right there, mate. Queen. Ship crashing? That's where the eggs and aliens end up. Why does it need to be a different planet? Whew. Nearly got me on a rant there, which I promised myself I wouldn't do. As we know from the other films though, the Xenomorphs regarded as the perfect organism. So you can see how to the engineers, this would be the ultimate end goal. They made this lab to create something perfect, but in the end it backfired. I see it working really well as a metaphor for how we marvel at creating AI, but ultimately David turns against us. They brought on their own destruction, and it's a sort of cautionary tale when it comes to creating life. Now David examines the vials and sees the goo moving on top. This is one of the first references to John Hurt sticking his face in the egg, which is later mirrored in Milburn and Fifield. Shaw also shines her flashlight around and the mural starts to change. Outside, we can also see a storm forming. Now, they don't spell this out in the film, but this is actually a booby trap. Similar to the pyramids, the secrets were guarded with the storms being used to stop the goo getting into the wrong hands. Knowing they need to go, Holloway shouts,
David, we are leaving!
which is a nod to this bit from Aliens.
Break! We are leaving! dying.
Making a mad dash to the ship, we see how it becomes like the wrath of God. Reminds me of a swarm of locusts, with the stones getting kicked up from it appearing like insects. Shaw gets swept up in the storm because she's dead set on grabbing the engineer head. Seeing it laid out, I definitely got a lot of Lovecraft vibes from the scene. Stuart Now Playing brought up how similar the plot was to At the Mountains of Madness, and to be fair, there's a lot of similarities. In case you don't know, it basically involves a science expedition to the Antarctic. The crew discover ancient paintings and murals, and also the existence of elder gods. Getting answers to their questions slowly drives them insane, and they discover things about humanity they never knew. In the book, we also get the Shoggoth, and I feel like the helmet design was based around that. Guillermo del Toro was actually supposed to be adapting the work, but he ended up dropping out the project. It said he felt Prometheus was too similar to what his outline was, and that some scenes were almost identical. Now, saying that, I don't necessarily think Scott took the story. Instead, I'm of the mind that you might see shared amongst the fandom that this was done to decanonize Alien vs Predator. Scott hated it, and though it had elements of what was outlined for the creatures' backstories, he thought they got a lot of things wrong. However, both this and Prometheus feature similar themes. They both have major expeditions, and clues that point out aliens had a hand in human civilization. There's two alien species that fight against each other, and both films end with a hybrid of a Xenomorph and secondary alien. Weyland is an elderly CEO in both that goes on a journey for his own specific needs, and both movies lead to him being killed by an alien. Both feature a female lead who lost their father, and both want to stop the threat reaching Earth's civilization. Both characters also have to fight against a giant alien awakened from stasis, and so on and so forth. Obviously, you get your other visually similar scenes, like humans exploring dark tunnels with flashlights. That's more of a standard in these films, but yeah, I think it's more just Scott making his version of the alien origins. Reviving the head, this is also Shaw attempting to play God. It explodes and highlights the kind of horrific things that can happen when pursuing scientific goals. Catching David wearing the dream helmet talking to a pod, this is another clue that Weyland's on the ship. Addressing them as Sir, he obviously wouldn't do this for anyone else. Outside, Vickers also wants to know what he said, and it adds to there being something else going on. She also slams him against the wall, and overall is pretty abusive. It's likely that she did this a lot, as he's unable to fight back. However, over the years, you could see this as being a factor into why he rises up against his masters. Instructing David to try harder, he then experiments with the black goo.
Big things have small beginnings.
At the snooker table, Holloway mocks him and even quotes Pinocchio.
I almost forgot you're not a real boy, huh?
A detail that I love is that we also have a little artificial figure of a boy on the table. Throughout the scene, this slowly falls over, and it could represent David's downfall. Reach! Anyway, that gives us one of my favourite lines from the film, which is Holloway saying, "Humans made AI simply because they could." David's reply just sums up how devastated he is and how his whole life's been a disappointment.
Can you imagine how disappointing it would be for you to hear the same thing from your creator?
Fassbender brings this eerily chilled and reserved performance that also just oozes a dignified anger. That's all I can really describe it as, but you can read so much into his reaction. Holloway then does a classic toast.
Here's mud in your eye, pal.
Now, the origin of this phrase is chalked up to a number of things. Some have said it originated from trenches in World War I when people toasted after, surviving another day or something. Others have said, though, that it originated from taverns in America. There it was said to show a successful harvest, and so on and so forth. However, there's some that believe it comes from the Bible. Jesus cured someone's blindness by rubbing mud in their eye, and thus this allowed them to see. Due to the film's allusions to religion, I do feel like that was probably Scott's intention. Either way, Holloway's goo's first noticed in his eye, so him saying that as he sips it could explain its manifestation there. Going back to Shaw's room, we get a great bit of subtle imagery. Holloway presents a rose that he pushes through a hologram, and he then stands inside of it and puts it to his chin. Corpses are sometimes placed in coffins with roses on their chests, and this hologram around him sort of creates that imagery. It foreshadows his death, but for now the pair end up sleeping together. This then creates a dark creature inside her, which makes it basically the old-fashioned way of the facehugger implanting a seed. This is mirrored in the Captain and Vickers, which according to the wiki was a redo of a scene from Alien. Initially, they had a scene with Dallas and Ripley that had the pair sleeping together. This was supposed to be emotionally sterile though, and meant to highlight the lack of actual romance between the pair. Ridley said that space travel could be long and isolating, and thus the crew engaged in casual sex to fulfill their basic needs. Scott never filmed it for the first film, but he felt here it would work well with Vickers. We also see Yannick as an accordion, which he says belonged to Stephen Stills. Later in the scene, he sings "Love the One You're With," which is a song by the artist. Obviously, but we're being thorough. From here, we then cut to Milburn and Fifield, who come across a pile of engineers. They say how it looks like something broke out of them, which you can understand. You figured that one out yourself, mate. Give yourself a pat on the back. Now, what else involves something sensual is the snake that goes down Milburn's throat. Yay! Hey, mate, creepy snake alien thing. Yeah, just keep calling it beautiful. Keep going. Hey, beautiful. You're beautiful. Stick your face in it. Obviously, it looks like a you know what, and the series has lots of phallic and throat imagery. There's of course the Xenomorph head, the Xenomorph second mouth, the face hugger tubes, and even Ash tries to shove a rolled up magazine down Ripley's throat. We also see a play on the acid blood as they try and cut it off, and this ends up mutating Fifield. Originally, the design of the creature he becomes was slightly different, with him appearing more like a Xenomorph. His face also elongated, and it almost combined with the helmet. What it helps though is to create something akin to the iconic head shape, which to me this creature Fifield becomes, that was the better design. Again though, they wanted to remove a lot of the connections to Alien and end up going with like a weird Frankenstein zombie that later arrives at the ship hunched over, with it having some Xeno qualities on the ground. Now this again was the scene that Scott ended up redoing from Alien, the deleted scene of Lambert's original deaths on YouTube, and it shows a Xenomorph hunched over like this. This then unfolds before killing the character, but they cut it because it looked bad. So here was Scott's chance to do it better, but I do wish they kept the original design. Anyway, at the ship, David discovers what I believe is an armory that was likely prepped to wipe out humanity. As Yannick later says, they wouldn't make weapons of mass destruction on their doorstep. The vials are laid horizontal, and this makes them appear like bullets. We also have the exoskeletons standing in a passage, which riffs off how the humans had their own suits on the ship. It's here that David comes across a chamber that ends up being like the one from Alien. Unfortunately for the creative team though, all of Giger's blueprints had been lost, so the set designers had to reference photos in the original film to get it as close as they could. I think they did a fantastic job, and I really didn't notice the difference. Now in here he discovers egg-like buttons and also a star map. Activating a hologram, we see an engineer sit down and play a flute. This would later be played off in Covenant, where David does the fingering. Stepping onto the platform, we then see the star map. This was inspired by the painting A Philosopher Lecture on the Orrery. Selecting Earth as the target, this was then supposed to tell the audience what the true mission was. It also allows the film to kind of play off some of the third acts from the others. There's always been the worry of a threat getting to Earth, and that's something they do with the ship. Anyway, Shaw watches firsthand how the virus takes over Holloway. Vickers refuses to let him on board though, and she ends up using a flamethrower to kill him. Ripley wanted to quarantine the crew in Alien, and a flamethrower is also a staple of the series. Now going off the production notes, this was also supposed to be a little clue about Wayland. Vickers' motivations were supposed to be fueled by the fact that she was worried about her dad. He only has days left to live, and she was worried a disease getting on board could kill him. To be fair, he didn't have that long left to live either. Apparently Theron broke character in the scene though, but they decided to keep the take in. In the build up to it, she was excited to do it because she'd get to wield a real flamethrower. However, on the day, it finally hit her. I'm setting a real stuntman on fire here, and she was obviously worried about it going wrong. So the shock on her face was genuine, as in the moment she felt it might have gone badly. On the ship, they then remove Shaw's cross and she's put into a scanner. Similar tech like this was used on Kane and Alien, and it also showed a foreign object. Ash was the one who kept it secret, and though David tells her it's abnormal, he wants to put her in cryosleep. This will allow him to take it back to Earth, which is something Burke wanted to do in Alien. Shaw ends up rushing to the med pod, which is where she performs a manual cesarean. To be honest with you, mate, when the movie came out, I was someone who was like, why is she able to do this if the pod's built for a man? However, we do see her override it and perform a manual procedure. I know that's another point of contention with the film, but it's simply done to remove a foreign object, which we see in all its gory. It's a really horrific surgery scene down to her having to yank out the umbilical cord herself. Stitched back up, she heads out and Fifield arrives and attacks. Killing one guy and smashing another's head like the like button, he runs rampant on the ship. He's eventually run over by a trans spaceport, which reminds me a lot of the moment in Aliens with the Xenomorph. On the ship, Shaw comes face to face with Wayland, and we get a scene that would put Tarantino off feet forever. Trying to warn him of what's going on, he taunts her by asking if she's lost her faith. Putting on Holloway's ring, she decides to journey out with Wayland. Holloway was obviously a skeptic, and wearing this ring, it has its symbolism that comes full circle at the end when she takes the cross back from David. But we're going out, Caesarean recovery be damned. Visited by Yannick, he says he won't allow any of the goo to get back to Earth and pretty much ensures his sacrifice. With Wayland, we then watch as his suit's fixed up. You might notice Ford here is also part of this too. She was also going to sedate Shaw to put her in stasis, which was clearly being directed by David. Because of this, you can put 2 and 2 together and realise she was part of Wayland's secret mission. So I love how some of the characters we've followed have this duplicitous nature, and it works nicely as a murder alien. There it was revealed Ash had the real mission working for the company, and there's the crew here who have that as well. Vickers kinda shows a dissent though, as she views him as disrupting the natural order of life. The old die and are replaced by the young, but he's trying to stop this. Rubbing her head against his hand, it's almost like someone kissing the ring of a king. This is rejected, and the pair depart and end with a pretty bitter goodbye.
Anything else?
No. Father. That's it.
This is then coupled with David, who says,
That being said, doesn't everyone want their parents dead?
Shaw is enraged by this though, and she says she didn't, and originally we were going to learn about her mother. We'd apparently find out she died giving birth to her, and thus the concept of birth's really traumatic for her. So that scene before gets way more gravity to it. Now, how her mother would have appeared in her dream at the start knowing this, I really don't know, but yeah, that's what was planned. Heading back out, I also love how Wayland questions whether it's okay to remove his helmet. David says the air's fine, but Shaw says how they don't know how Holloway got infected.
Wait, we still don't know how Holloway got infected. If it's in the air.
It's not.
How do you know that?
I just love how David doesn't answer, because obviously he knows he's the one who infected him. As they head in, the scan then reveals it's the Horseshoe ship, but it's too late to warn those inside. However, it's clear David knew beforehand due to exploring the ship.
What is this?
It's a cargo hold.
Though we said armory before, that's of course the correct term, but he held this back to manipulate the humans, which is a great little indication of his character. Waking up the engineer, we see they also suffer from the same hibernation sickness as the humans, showing how similar we are. As we mentioned though, the conversation doesn't go too well and everyone gets wiped out. In his dying breath, Wayland says there's nothing, and he dies disappointed. Just in the same way he created machines just because he could do it, he finds that mirrored in the engineers. Much like how we'd carelessly dump a computer, the engineers are now dumping their creation. But how does our computer feel when we do that? Well, it doesn't, at least that we know about, but maybe they share the same sad emptiness as Wayland does.
There's nothing.
I know.
Now, the pair being shot by this, it just shows how similar that they are. Both got to meet their maker, and both saw there wasn't really any meaning behind why they were created, which is very devastating. I actually think though that Wayland's death's pretty poignant, with David giving him a somber farewell.
Have a good journey, Mr. Wayland.
He actually seems more human than Vickers, who simply leaves the monitor saying that it's done. Anyway, as the pilot seat begins to prepare, we watch as Shaw makes a run for it. I know the film gets dinged a lot for her running with a cesarean, but to be fair, she does constantly keel over throughout all of these scenes. Your mileage is going to vary on it though, and yeah, I do get why some people don't like it. I don't know how much logic should have been brought to an Alien movie though, but to me, they do at least keep acknowledging it. Like, they constantly bring attention to it, and it isn't just ignored, to be fair, but yeah, it would hurt running like that, I imagine. I've not had a cesarean myself, so I don't know. As the ship begins to ascend though, Yannick, and who I'm going to refer to as the Greek choir, they decide to head to their deaths. They're pretty much just there for laughs, you know, rattling off what's happening in the movie, and basically, yeah, just the Greek choir, that's the best word for it, I think.
If you think this means the bet's off, you're wrong.
Why don't you play me on the other side?
To be honest though, seeing how easily the horseshoe is destroyed, I'm not sure it would have been a threat to Earth. 2,000 years ago, yeah, definitely, but if Earth has ships like the Prometheus, I feel like they would have just got annihilated upon reaching the planet. Like one nuke, even one missile, it's over, you save the world. Anyway, the life raft's ejected and Vickers escapes in a pod. As the Prometheus heads towards the ship, you also see graphics saying impact imminent. These are based off the ones from Alien after Ripley initiated the self-destruct. Now this impact causes the ship to crash, which makes it begin to roll. Another thing people hate is how they don't just run to the side, and this leads to Vickers being crushed. I think when you're panicking though and just running for your life, you're not really gonna have the logic kick in that you would if you were calm. So again, it might not work for you, which is totally understandable, but I'm kind of just like it's part of the movie. Like I have way bigger issues with the story than that. Either way, Shaw has a close brush with death, but she survives due to the landscape. Getting to the lifeboat, it's here that Shaw encounters her quote-unquote child. This is extremely squid-like in nature, with this being a design they originally wanted for the facehuggers. However, they felt the finger design was creepier, but I appreciate this callback for a prequel. Ambushed by the engineer, it's then her child saves her. Just happens to be a really messed up metaphor for the parental themes in the movie, and also the idea that you're creating monsters and creating something new. Originally though, the engineer was going to enter the room and notice the video on the wall. In the lead up to this moment, we can see footage of Shaw as a child playing violin next to a tree. It was implied that he was impressed by this and didn't realise humans had such grace. This would then make him question his choices, but the facehugger would have cut the moment short. Impregnated by a tube going down his throat, we finally get that imagery coming full circle. On the outside, the skies then begin to clear, which is almost like the heavens opening up. Saying she can't do this anymore, she then hears a disembodied voice. Now, though this is David, you can read into the symbolism here as being like a message from the heavens. I did feel like the head being like this could even be a nod to Orpheus, who I first learned about in Sandman. This was actually a figure from Greek myths who was beheaded, but he still remained alive. This was then carried and cared for, and I do feel like the presentation's similar. We also get this line,
Dr. Shaw, can you hear me?
which is a subtle nod to this.
Ash, can you hear me?
In both scenes, we have a beheaded android talking things out with the movie's main lead, which is a nice callback. Retrieving her cross from his suit, the pair then decide to work together. He informs her there's other ships, and thus she needs him to leave the planet. Wanting to travel out to the engineer, Shaw is still dedicated to finding answers. She wants to know why they created us and then hated us, and obviously the plan was going to have the Jesus revealed down the line. This would have then enriched her faith and paid off the central theme of belief.
Because that's what I choose to believe.
But it's what I choose to believe.
We then end with Shaw taking off in a ship, leaving a voice log about how she's the last surviving member of the Prometheus. This of course played off Ripley's final notes in the first two films. The ride isn't over yet though, and we close out with the birth of an Ultramorph. The creature was based on a goblin shark, and I do hope we see it at some point in the future. Originally though, this would have had a much larger role and actually appear earlier in the movie. The plan was that it would hatch and follow Shaw and she'd have a final fight against it. The original ending also had her going back to the tunnels, at which point she'd discover a garden. This would be like the Garden of Eden and then playing to the title of Paradise. However, here we see the ship going into space and out to the engineer's home. Obviously though, we know Ridley would go in another direction, with most of these plot threads being dropped. That includes Elizabeth Shaw, sadly, who basically got poochied off screen. Anyway, the sequel is of course more of an Alien film, and I think that this was kind of damaged by expectations. Everyone wanted a Xenomorph movie, but Prometheus just isn't that. Like, there are connections there, but they're very tenuous, and I think that harmed a lot of people's enjoyment. However, I actually think there's a lot to like here, even if the ideas are better than the execution. I feel like the complaints people have are valid, but it also doesn't mean the ideas explored here aren't at least interesting. I do wish that they'd left a lot of the deleted scenes though, as I really feel like they help improve the movie. Though Scott's often known for his director's cuts, he has said he's declined the studio's offer for this one. So instead, we just have the deleted scenes to piece this together, but hopefully this has given you a bit more of a full picture. The whole theme of the movie is creators coming back to kill their children, and that feels like it's almost what Scott's done. He didn't want to make an alien movie, and instead was creating a new mythology to spring something out from. Whether that works or not is up for debate, but obviously I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I hope you've enjoyed the video. Please drop a like if you have, and if you got any other theories or stuff we missed or got wrong, yeah, we might have got stuff wrong, it's very open-ended, yeah, drop a comment below, as I'd love to read your corrections. And just general thoughts. Did you know as well that members of the channel also get early access to videos? If you click the join button, you get at least one breakdown a week before anyone else. Costs just 99 cents a month, and we've tried to sell it where hopefully it's not a lot to you, but if a lot of you do it, then it will mean a lot to us. Now if you want something else to watch, you've got our ultimate breakdown of the Alien quadrilogy on screen right now. We also have a breakdown of Alien Romulus, and yeah, 2 big things to sink your second mouth of teeth into. If not, then huge thank you for sitting through this video. I've been your host Paul, you've been the best, and I'll see you next time. Take care, peace.